Welcome back to Morning Express. We do apologize for the delay, but we're now coming to you live from our newsroom. And this is the newsroom where we discuss stories that have made headlines and possibly what we have covered and how we have covered it, and maybe areas that we may have left out, and basically just critique ourselves. And joining me in, well, not in studio, but in the newsroom today, I'll have to get used to this. We have Dr. Buka, who is the Assistant Professor for Aga Khan University. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We have Eric Latif, who is a journalist. And last but not least, we have Acting CEO for Media Council of Kenya, Victor Bwire. Asanteni sana. Now, let's start with, of course, we only have 54 days to go before the election. And one of the things that many of us as journalists are concentrating on now is reporting on what's going on. And I know that MCK has been running some training. Maybe you can start from there and possibly how the training is going and maybe some of the gaps that you may have realized that we may have as journalists when it comes to election reporting.
Thank you, Mike. One, with the colleagues, obviously, IBC, UNDP, we have been running a program on training, production of guidelines for elections reporting, which were launched and appended, approved by the industry. Then now we have been running trainings across the country. Obviously, we can't reach all. We have 3,000 registered, accredited journalists. Averagely, our training takes 20 to 25 packs. So however much we do the trainings, we might not reach everybody. But that is running. Other colleagues, Amwick, KUJ, KCA are running trainings. I know the university at Aga Khan are running trainings on election. And why? Is that there are quite a number of emerging issues that we wanted to interest journalists into looking at, largely moving away from a game of strategy to the substance of election. Our thinking was that how do we help journalists set the agenda for these elections in terms of, one, encouraging media houses to have election desks, specific desks that will deal with elections. Each of the media house identifying particular issues that they would want to push as an agenda, maybe health, education, road, so that both in terms of their reporting and in terms of the interviews they are doing in their studios, they can have a way of influencing the debates and the discussions to push. Because remember, most of the parties also delayed to launch their manifestos. So we didn't know what they stand for. So one of the focus of the training is how do we help journalists focus on the politician, on the campaigners, to focus on a particular issue. So that it's not just health. So that's what, and then obviously the issues of now emerging issues like gender-sensitive reporting for the first time, and the party, I mean, the rules allow now the laws on the two-thirds gender. Are we as journalists also alive to this in terms of marginalization of especially women, people with special needs, with disability, youth? So how do we mainstream the reporting, the hosting, moderation of programs, aware that there are these requirements? Then another issue that there had been too many changes in election-related laws. 2016, 2017, there were still changes to the election law, so that there's too much ignorance about some of these things, even in the media, that when even unofficially we are talking about these adverts, then you obviously see that our media houses have not been updated on the current laws. So that was a gap that we identified, and those are some of the areas we have been focusing on. Safety and security of journalists, a number of journalists learning from the primaries were harassed, beaten up. Simply, so again, some sessions on sensitizing journalists on how to keep safe while reporting from these hostile environments. So that's some of the largely the areas we are focusing on.
Dr. Buka, you're one of the trainers, and possibly you could let us or highlight what maybe you've realized possibly we are lacking in the reporting that we are doing. One of the interviews we had earlier on today is that journalists are very sensational in their reporting. Given that this is a very sensitive time, and of course temperatures are likely to just raise just by virtue of the fact that we're getting closer to the election, possibly the gaps that we may have in our reporting.
Thank you, Michael. I think one of the things that I'd like to say is that the training, first of all, is important in the sense that we have a number of young journalists in most of the newsrooms. For a number of them, this would be the first time they would be covering elections. And that is as a result of some of the changes that we've been seeing happening in media houses, where a number of the senior reporters exited or had to leave because of the downsizing. So with a number of younger people in newsrooms, there is need for them to be trained, because this would be the first time they're encountering an election. Having said that, I think one of the things that is evident that shouldn't be lost to us is the opportunity for journalists to share experiences. And one of the things that the trainings that we are running at Aga Khan University, that the Media Council is running, is for journalists to be able to share their experiences. When they covered the primaries, what were the issues, so that as they get into the elections, then they have a better understanding of what to expect and how to navigate some of those issues that would arise as they cover elections. It is important to note that there are certain realities that journalists have to contend with as they cover the elections, whereas the guidelines have certain stipulations. And the guidelines basically are not a prescription. They're just a guide, to help journalists be able to navigate that space, that there are certain realities that they would be confronted with. So, for example, when we talk about gender-sensitive reporting, there are certain realities, cultural realities that come to bear that shouldn't be lost to us. So, I think one is just making sure that journalists or reporters are very intentional about seeking out women candidates, that they look at content from a gender lens and ensure that different perspectives, different gender, different groups are represented in the kind of reportage that they are producing. But then again, we all remember that in 2007, the media was, accused as one of, the institutions that fueled the tension. In 2012, 2013, the media went quiet. And, there has been a lot of debate about, what happened at that particular time. So one is the training emphasizes the role that media should play in elections, where you're not playing a quiet role, but you're providing information for voters, you're providing space for, political candidates to be able to articulate their issues and analyzing them and their manifestos, but also, playing that watchdog role in a very sensitive situation such as this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eric, you've covered several elections. I don't know how many, but you've done this for a while. And you're not part of that statistic that we had many journalists who possibly have done elections but are not there now. And there is a need for that experience. Possibly what you find different this year, or maybe different this year, given in 2007, media was accused of being, like Dr. Buka has said, one of the institutions that fueled. In 2013, now was the opposite, where we went completely quiet because, again, you refused.
In fact, I wanted to start on that point. Media in 2013 did not go completely quiet. The media did not go quiet. Media reported. The media reported a lot of issues surrounding the election. Media, the issue was that trying to strike that balance of objectivity on all fronts. Objectivity in terms of the parties, the protagonists in the election, and objectivity in terms of national interests. And that's where, some people would now come and say that media went quiet, because they did not play a role that they would have wanted to have been played for some people, like it happened in 2007. I think in 2007, the media was just, it was reporting everything that was coming. It was filtering. The filters were maybe just one layer of a filtration. In 2013, there was another layer of filtration. And, it's what do we want to cover? Or how do we want, to what extent do we actually give this coverage? That, I think, was a sense of maturity. It was forced upon the media, but it was a good sense of maturity. And I think if we just continue that way, with being aware that, you need to have proper filters. What is it that you're saying, and how are you saying it? What's the impact of this on the election process itself and on the nation afterwards? It's very important, and I'm sure that's what part of the, what Victor has just said. That's part of what they're training.
All right.
So I don't expect that even in this particular training, it's going to tell us to go back in 2007. It's not going to tell us to do that.
Surely that statement of 2013 and media going on has been repeated 100 times. But you look at literature, because I followed up from the regulator. I wrote to all the parties and asked for these stories that media slept on, because we picked it as a serious indictment of the media. So immediately we wrote to those various individuals who are saying that to give us any story that
may have been left out.
Up to date, I've never received any story. So I think it was
Maybe
like
it's because you're the ones to come up with the stories, so you didn't.
because what Eric is raising is that there are realities, and media operates in an environment. So media is not. The environment around 2013 elections was affecting everybody. There was the ICC, there was one of the journalists at the ICC, there was militarization of peace, and media operates in such an environment. So everybody was looking at peace, and that was what the predetermination of everybody. It's not that media slept on any story, but it was just the mind that.
That's the media. Very many people are actually playing on that issue of peace. Very many NGOs came out, Red Cross was churches, everybody was actually going on the issue of peace. So when media is telling that story of peace, how is that being called going quiet?
Going quiet, Dr. Buga.
What shouldn't be lost to us is that we must understand where the media was coming from in 2013. That having been, on the receiving end of the bashing after the 2007 elections, there was, that looking at themselves and asking ourselves, did we contribute? And navigating that space, as Latif says, with several layers or filters of ensuring that what they're reporting, does not propagate the tensions that arose in 2007. But, the conversation around 2013 all over was, in as much as we're getting into elections, there is life beyond elections, and we need to, beyond the election, and we need to be peaceful as we engage in that process. And so part of the accusation, for those that have accused media, even without the evidences that Victor is talking about, is that media played an advocacy role, by highlighting some of the stories of NGOs, of groups that were civil society and groups that were advancing peace, that media then, instead of being objective, and again, that's debatable whether we can actually have an objective media. I am against peace, So with that, then, part of the training that is being done now is looking at those two scenarios and asking ourselves, how do we then go into this election, so that we are balanced in our reporting, that we provide avenues and platforms for different groups, different institutions, different politicians to be able to articulate their issues, interrogate, manifestos, interrogate the performance of some of the candidates who are going in for, a second term in office, and, provide a forum for debate so that the voters can be able to make an informed decision outside of what has become, the norm of elections in the country.
Still talking about the training, I think I'd like to commend the Media Council and, of course, all the other institutions that are conducting this training. And I know Media Council conducts regular trainings, on various issues, and it's a good thing. When it comes to election training, I think we should conduct training on elections throughout, especially during the off-season, because that's when you have time, you have people who have time to concentrate and they can think about some things, because they'll also help to draft, in drafting of the regulations and all, you have time to discuss these things in depth.
And even understanding the laws. Because one of the challenges is the laws. Yeah.
Because also, you see, these laws are actually being passed during that off-season. So it's a good avenue for Media Council and all the trainers to engage and interrogate what's the current law, what needs to be changed. It could also help by highlighting these issues where the gaps are in the laws to help in the legislators coming up with better laws.
Okay.
It's a continuous process.
Let me just, I can't agree more with what Latif has said, because part of the experiences that we've had as the trainings have been going on is you have election laws, some of the reporters, depending, because we assume that when you operate in an environment such as Nairobi, you have access to all this information and you have people, peers and colleagues who can be able to guide you. When you go into the mashinani, into the rural areas, for example, or within the community media organizations, a number of these reporters have, don't even know what the election laws, what the laws are. They don't even understand what different offices or the political offices are actually supposed to do. So, or institutions. So when some of the candidates come into the studios, for example, for interviews, they do not understand from what point they should be interrogating them, not understanding what's the role of a senator, what's the role of a women's rep, what's the role of the MCA. Yes, especially the women's rep seat, which has largely been misunderstood by very many people, including some of the candidates themselves.
And even the candidates themselves.
Yes.
And maybe, Victor, we can also look at the importance now of a specific election desk that we should have in the media houses, which now concentrates on making sure if it's elections, you first of all understand the role of each legislator. Secondly, you talked about creating an agenda. How do we go about creating that agenda? Because we are accused of following politicians and basically reporting he said, she said.
Thanks. Largely that's changing. I can say from, I see Nation has a pull-out every day on some specific, the Standard has a pull-out. And you have several now programs on TV and on KTN, quite a number of very informative programs. So to me, things are changing in the sense of the discussion we've been having. Like I know Standard now, Nation, Star, they have now desks designated specifically for these elections with a pool of reporters who have been helped to dispatch, trained, empowered to do this. And this is helping because if you see people have been demanding, for example, for manifestos for this party. I've seen a lot of articles, a lot of discussions, where are the manifestos? That then means people are now moving away from, because if you look at 2007, largely, it was personality-based reporting that brought these issues. Once the reporting is purely on personality. I remember in one of the by-elections in Kajiado, I think in Mush or somebody, where people knew Raila and Uhuru more than the candidate himself in a by-election. So purely personal. But you see gradually that's moving. You see now people talking about, when people talk about rents, people are interrogating, how will the rent be reduced or improved? People are asking SGR, people are asking questions. And that then means that media is providing a forum for people now to start looking just beyond the 2-3 personalities or the 8 candidates that are there. To us, that's a great improvement. That if we can continue pushing, having people talk about issues outside their personalities, it would help. What scholars have called the substance of the election. What is it in this election? That much as Kenyans want also the game of strategy, the dancing and the what, because it makes it light for people. But as we are happy, there are gaps, yes. Because some of the media houses, obviously because of capacity issues, both manpower and related, might not be. Remember, most of those media houses, also especially the FM stations, are owned by the same politicians. So sometimes it becomes also difficult for the journalists, much as they want to do their professional work, but there's a lot of interference from the owners, from now the advertisers, and you'll talk about it, which quite a number, and we talk to quite a number of our journalists are very frustrated. While people think outside that these journalists are useless, they don't know what is happening, sometimes they know they want to do their professional things, but because of proprietorial and advertiser influence, quite a number of journalists are very frustrated. You do your stories, very informative, you invite guests. I've seen where even the owner of the station pulled out a guest. When a journalist has done all that to invite somebody to come, then he says, that one can't come in my studio. And they threw them out. So
Victor, I'd like to throw something at you, and you alluded to it actually. We talked about if we had special desks like health, we'd be pushing the health agenda and asking the health questions during this election. If we had this kind of desks prior, even in existing newsrooms, how would that help? How can the Media Council empower? Or have you actually interrogated the media houses to find out what's wrong? Why don't we have these properly established desks in newsrooms that will help propel the story? For example, health. We have doctor strikes, nurses striking, we have all this. Health is a very big issue. We don't have a health desk. Properly functioning health.
Encouraging media. We encourage media to start now adopting also a business model in terms of they are doing that. Like for example, Nation, their health desk is now with a partnership with Bill Gates Foundation and is paid for. Can Standard do the same? So that we don't just depend on, because content is not selling, it's not adding revenue to the media house, and these are capitalists. They want to make money. So sometimes they want to. So setting up desks, they think it's a heavy investment. Look at, for example, Business Daily at Nation. It started a specialized publication, and we have seen it going places. This Seed of Gold, for example, Saturday, and Standard also has a pull-out. People has a pull-out. And you see there's a lot and these are partnerships with the universities like Egerton, which are doing agriculture. So we would want to encourage media houses to start looking out for partners. We are now working with some international foundation. We want to start a health academy. A health academy will be training journalists purely on health reporting, and also we want media houses will be speaking from media houses for a week's training or 2 weeks training. So this is something even globally what is happening, that content is the king. And it can only be the king if it's serious content. Nobody will come for useless.
But it also needs to bring in revenue, because revenue is another aspect of it. Yeah. Dr. Booker, maybe coming back to political reporting and the fact that in the electioneering period, one of the things that we've seen come up this time is we have more women politicians who've come up. Maybe your thoughts, and I know you're passionate about this, in terms of coverage, whether we have given them fair coverage. We have been accused sometimes of having manels, but I'll tell you from the side I sit, it also is very difficult to have ladies come for, especially, for instance, a morning show. So I appreciate the fact that you're there. But your thoughts on how fair we have been?
I know and I understand that it is difficult or challenging to always have gender balance in all the content, and journalists even in the training.
Does gender balance always mean that there has to be a woman there physically?
Not really. And I think when we look at politics and the election, we want to look at what's women's participation in politics. It's not just the candidates themselves, but also looking at women as voters. We are highlighting them as voters, for example, and what the expectations are. Are we looking at women as, agents of peace and negotiators in the process as we get into elections? So let us not just narrow it down to, the candidates. Having said that, do we have that representation? And that's where we need to interrogate ourselves. One, we are not seeing, we have made a lot of progress, I must say that for the first time I have seen panels on television where it's all the women candidates, and that's impressive. I have seen women coming in as analysts, not as we would like to see, but we have seen that. So in terms of, have we made progress? Yes, we have. Are we where we would like to be? Not yet.
What's lacking?
What's lacking? It's both sides. That one, the women themselves also need to be able to get into these spaces. I wouldn't blame the media for not providing that platform. I think one that it needs to be both sides pulling together to be able to get us to that space. Women coming out and taking the positions that are there for them to be able to articulate their needs. But two, that media then should also be very intentional, and that's where sometimes media then also has to be an advocate, being intentional about seeking out women, so that when you have a panel or you're constituting a panel, then you ask yourself, are all voices represented, or a majority of the voices represented? And then if you can see that is not coming to bear, then you actively seek out women or men, to be able to participate in that dispensation. But we must also realize that whereas that is expected, that there are also cultural issues. There is a lot that is at stake that women women sources had also had to find, and that there are very many other factors that sometimes work against them in trying to get into those spaces. It's interesting when you talk about some of the experiences in training that in some places, for example, even when a woman candidate wants to speak, she tells the journalist, I have to consult my party leader, because I don't want to say anything that's against what my party leader believes, Journalists who have covered parliament, Rosaline Obala, for example, has oftentimes said that even when she wants to, to have the women's voice in parliament, for example, they do not speak because they don't want to ruffle the status quo. So it's both women themselves and media, being very proactive in ensuring that those voices are heard, because it is important to have women in political leadership. They bring certain things that that would be lost if they're not there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eric, from experience, because I know you've been in the field, you've done many interviews, and maybe the challenges that possibly we face from the media, just to highlight so that the ladies will also realize that it's not that the media is just silent and saying, look, we don't want to have them there, but some of the challenges that possibly we need to overcome to have that gender representation.
I think it begins, for me, and I've said this a couple of times, we have very many good women campaigners out there who talk about the gender issues and they highlight the gender issues. I had this conversation when I was hosting a show on Capital FM, Talk 360, and during that time is when we were constituting all these commissions after the 2010 Constitution. And you looked at the kind of people who were applying for various positions, and always you'd see that the positions for chairman were being applied to by men, and then the women were going for vice chair. And so you began asking, so why aren't we applying for the chairman position? Why aren't you applying for chief justice? Why aren't you applying to join this commission, the panel that is going to interview? There's a time when, which I don't remember which commission, but there's a time when we had a delay in establishment of a commission because the interviewing panel was not properly constituted. Why wasn't it properly constituted? Because we did not have enough female applicants to join the panel. And it begins from that point of we have very many people who would actually be able to. If you look at, just hear what Dr. Buka has just given us as an example, a person who is a national leader in the National Assembly but does not feel strong enough or does not feel confident enough to actually go out and express herself before consulting the party or before consulting the male colleagues, or feeling that if I say this, I may lose my standing in this small community that I have of parliamentarians. I think it just begins from that point. If the ladies that we have are already there and strong, they just need to move to the next level. And
would you attribute it possibly to culture? Maybe the cultural background that we're coming from.
It is culture. And probably now it's either way as well. Do we also, maybe we just need to take a step back and actually accept where we are culturally and say, if we are here culturally, then how do we navigate this culturally? How do we empower the women? Because if you go to any society, women actually have a very strong voice. It's just that theirs is soft. They will not come out and say, no, but they will use soft power, and their will is what will happen. So do we go back into looking at our culture and seeing how do we use that soft power to actually empower the woman and have the woman's voice and the woman's issues articulated.
All right, let's look at election laws. And this, of course, we've come under heavy criticism, especially with some of the adverts that are going on air currently. And I'll just read from the Election Offences Act 2016. And this is from Article 14.2. And it says, no government shall publish any advertisement and achievements of their respective governments. And of course, this includes now the county governments, either in print media, electronic media, or by way of banners or hoarding in public places during the election period. Now, we've been accused, Victor, of literally falling prey to this because, as we all know, we have county governments and the government currently giving us their achievements in form of advertising. But of course, the timing is what is in question here. We're already into the election campaign period. Your thoughts on that and your comments on that? Because again, at the end of the day, I need to get paid.
Thanks, Mike. It's a challenge. One is purely ignorance and part of we. When we are doing these trainings and we are walking around the journalists, some people have never heard about this. The big five might have heard because they have legal departments, nation standards have legal department. But the other majority, we have 139 radio stations in this country. Do they even have access to this? But ignorance of the law is not a defense, obviously. I remember just before the primaries, before the Nairobi primaries, and Sonko had brought the documentaries, and it was less than 24 hours to an election, and the law says very clearly, adverts should not run up to 48 hours. You remember. And quite a number of colleagues called. I remember colleagues from, do we run this advert or what does it look? But the law says 48 hours to an election, no advert should run from any political. So, but people like you're saying, looks at the money involved and risked and say, let's run it. They'll sue it in a court of law and we'll pick part of that money to pay the fine. And that would media house. But largely the laws are very clear. the 2016 election laws were passed. They had a lot of controversies. People are not so...
Allow me to pause here a little because we need to release KTN Home right about now, then continue with this conversation. Those of us on KTN Home, it's time for Life and Style, so we'll say goodbye. But those of us on KTN News, we continue with this conversation as we get to our closing remarks. So for KTN Home, goodbye.
So people are getting money, yes, because remember government had also denied media houses revenue by my gov and whatever. So people are reaping the harvest because it's an election. But it's again
still had to come back somehow.
Yeah, but it's again an election. The challenge is that sometimes that much as people don't know, the law is very clear, and let's just abide by the law. Because once we also start showing the same impunity, and then it brings...
We cease to become...
how do we hold others accountable when we are breaking the
How do we
same law?
navigate that, I'd call it tricky sort of terrain? Because one thing, the law is very clear on what is required, but at the same time, it is a form of revenue.
It's not tricky. You look at it practically in law. It's very clear that you should not take any advert from a government institution. Government, either national or county government, you will not take. It's the issue of whether it's revenue coming in or not. Now you're trying to play that game that we keep accusing others of playing. It should be very clear that we shall not take this. However, what are the loopholes in this law? For instance, if we say that the county government of Meru shall not advertise, does it say the candidate Peter Munya cannot advertise? What if Peter Munya comes and says, well, you give me, and I'm asking for 5 more years, and this is what I have done?
But I'll read it again. No government shall publish any advertisement of achievements.
Yes, government. So if the loophole...
But what is happening is purely
governments?
If you look at also the adverts that are
being
going
paid for by government.
They are purely government. So either like unofficially what we are talking about, the parties might be paying, Munyas might be paying, but what is coming out in the public is that this is government of Meru or government of Buzi or government of whatever. So once that government of is there, then
But what Latif is saying is that sometimes it becomes very difficult to draw the line between, this is where government achievements end and the individual achievements begin. So when an individual then comes out and says, this is what I have done, then then it becomes a question of semantics and where do you draw the line? The question for me then would be that whereas media plays that watchdog role and is very fast at calling out when politicians, when government seem to be going against the law, who's checking us? Who's checking the media? Who's making us accountable to ensure that, who's watching the watchman to ensure that he doesn't sleep when he's actually supposed to be watching?
And I guess, in terms of now the training that you've been conducting now, when it comes to understanding the law, because I think that's another big part that we may not be able to know how to go about. But your thoughts on where we are on understanding the law, even as a media or as reporters or journalists?
I think we still have a long way to go in understanding the law. It's been evident in the trainings that are being done, and that is why election reporting training should not be done. I mean, we shouldn't even be doing that training now. The journalists, reporters should actually now be executing. They should be doing the work. But the training starts very late in the day. And as a result of that, then there is so much, that the reporters then have to be able to learn and understand within that short time. So part of this process should begin right after the elections, looking at how did the media perform, what did we not do right, what did we do right, what laws do we need to understand that are important for us as we get into elections. So that is one area where we are still lagging behind. Yeah.
Okay, as we wind up, Victor, maybe as we're talking about creating agenda, I'll give you an example that was given this morning. If IEBC came out today and said that they are ready for the elections, that doesn't hit the headlines. If a politician comes out and says that elections are going to be rigged, that becomes a headline. Balancing what we report sensationally, especially given the time that we have right now, we have a responsibility in creating faith in the institutions and creating trust.
Thanks, Mike. The duty bearers. when, for example, you do a good story, KTN, that's the duty we expect you to do. So sometimes we might not say, Mike, you have done well, but that's what we expect you to do. So IBC being ready for an election is what people expect. So that's not news. That's not news, because that's what is expected of them. But when something appears to show that IBC is not ready, then journalists are over asking, why are you not ready? So to me, I don't see any malice. I just see the way of orientation, the way we report, the way we have been made to, I mean, even the training, that news is always the unusual. You know, so that then also makes, remember again, in addition to that, that quite a number of our journalists are on retainers, on freelancers. So somebody surviving, he must get a story because he's paid per story. So sometimes that push to have a story sometimes blinds a some of our colleagues to even now forget the basic small things that could have made a story. And that's why we also want to bring in editors, because these stories don't just come from correspondence and they hit the headline. What's the role of editors in this thing? What's the role of revised editors, sub-editors? We must own this thing, all of us, so that we are not saying it's our journalist from Kisumu who sent this. What is our role? We have a higher responsibility in ensuring that some of these stories meet. I mean, journalists are not pipelines. Not all the stories that come we must publish. We must contextualize, we must look at the national interest, we must look at public interest, and all that. So yes, there are incidences of sensationalization. Media is not perfect. We have cases, individual cases, where people have made mistakes. Some of them we have corrected, some of them we have taken action, some of them we have asked the individual media houses to take action on those individual journalists. But overall, we are doing well.
All right. Dr. Buka, our responsibility on creating faith and confidence in the institutions.
Media can only create that faith if the institutions themselves are working towards that. And I think for me, you know, my thoughts are that those institutions should also be able to inspire confidence and actually show that they're working. So they also have an obligation, you know, to the public, so that when the media then is reporting them, they have done, or they are seen to be doing what they are supposed to be doing. But, you know, part of the role of the media then is when we look at the guidelines that, you know, media has a duty to voters, to the nation, to to citizens, even those that are not going to be voting, you know, because there is life. Actually, you know, what's facts and not what we imagine or what we think should be reported, but we are actually reporting facts, and that fact then goes back to what are the institutions doing. So it starts from the institutions themselves.
Okay, Eric, and I'll give you an example on this one as you. There's a leader who's come out and said that certain leaders of Jubilee met with IEBC but have not tabled the evidence. Now, I know there's a gradual reporting. There's what you report, this is what was said. But what should be the follow-up story for that? Because if left hanging, then it leaves the electorate to just make their own conclusion.
That is right into that issue of how do you actually build trust on an institution. If you're going into an election, and this is where it comes in, you're going into an election, you know, when you cast aspersions on the main institution in this election, what that does to the people who are going to participate in the election, the voters and the candidates, then the onus here is that first day. If you've said something that you know, you're saying that IEBC is not ready for this election, or IEBC is playing dirty, then you should immediately demand for that evidence before you even report it. This is what has happened. Then you immediately demand. If you're running that story, then you're saying that Michael has said that IEBC officials met with officials of the printing company in Dubai, in Qatar, and this was the dates, and he has supplied. He has furnished evidence. These are airline tickets. This is a photo taken by a hidden camera showing the meeting happening. This is an audio recording. You should go beyond that.
So are we falling prey to...
Completely. And I think in such issues, and it's very important that, you know, media sits back and looks at what is our role in this. You're going into an election. Surely, the one institution that really needs to get credibility is the IEBC. If you want to question IEBC, question it with actual facts. If you're going to report something that shows that IEBC is not ready, then at that point, don't say IEBC is ready or IEBC says it's ready. But if anyone comes and says IEBC is not ready, report it with IEBC is not ready because of ABCD, and this is actual evidence. That's where it comes in. Also, I feel sorry for these institutions because these institutions are all government. Bureaucracy in government is heavy. So their own communication and because that's their role to communicate and show that we are to build that trust. This is what we are doing. This is how well we are doing it. Their own communication is not so good. They have so much bureaucracy that the communication department is treated like a corner backroom department. Yet it's during an election process that communication department is as important as a commission itself.
Okay.
And one of the last things I would say that let also the institutions, including IBC, concentrate on their core mandates and do their business because these criticisms will come. Remember, both in IBC and they are also all called NASA supporters within even. So some of these things emanate from the same institutions. So these politicians don't just wake up and start saying. Some of that information comes from the same. It comes from the same institutions. So to me, it's less people working transparently and concentrate on the commanders. Once you are in such an office, criticisms will come or people will want to distract you. Let's concentrate on the key focus of what we want to deliver, credible election, and that
is very crucial.
All right, Dr. Booker, your final comments?
Yeah, I think let's report fact. Let's follow up on the stories. Let's ensure that what we are reporting is credible. Let us go the extra mile. I think in an election period such as this, that is, that in a contest, there are all manner of interests. So let's ensure that what we are doing, doesn't get us on one side as media, but that we are reporting from a very balanced standpoint and ensuring that we have facts to be able to back some of the things that we are saying.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Booker, Assistant Professor, Aga Khan University. We also have Victor Bwira, who's the Acting CEO for Media Council of Kenya. And last but not least, Eric Latif, who's a journalist. Thank you for joining us this morning for the newsroom. And that's where we wind up the newsroom this morning. Thank you for staying with us. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back with some news updates and right here on Morning Express. So do stay with us.